I bought the mountain house for the silence. Not the kind of silence that hides in city corners heavy and anxious, but the kind that breathes. Up here at 6,000 feet above sea level, silence moves like smoke through the pines, drifts through the timber walls, and settles in your bones until you forget what noise ever felt like. After 40 years in a city that never slept, raising 2 children, burying a husband, and running a family store that ate more of me than I ever got to keep, I had earned this quiet. I found the house on a foggy afternoon 2 years ago. A cedar chalet perched on a ridge overlooking Lake Meriton, its wide porch wrapping around like open arms. The kind of place where winters are poetry, white, slow, deliberate. I remember the realtor saying, "It's far from everything." "That's the point," I told him. I spent months restoring it myself. Sanded the floors until the wood blushed honey, filled the kitchen with copper pots that glowed in morning light, and built a small reading nook by the window where I could watch snow fall and remember that peace doesn't have to be quiet. Sometimes it's just yours. My name is Helena Ward, 71 years old. Widow. Mother. Survivor of too many compromises. For the first time in decades, I had a space that belonged entirely to me. Until last December, when my son's voice broke through the static of my solitude. "Mom, we're coming up for the holidays," Liam said cheerfully, not asking but declaring. "You'll love it. Jessica's parents, her sister, the kids. Everyone wants to see the mountains. Everyone." In that single word I felt the air thin around me. The morning they arrived, the snow was still falling in soft sheets, and the fire had just started its slow crackle. Then came the sound, tires crunching over ice, engines humming too loudly for the quiet I'd built here. 3 SUVs gliding into my driveway like they owned the slope. Jessica stepped out first, dressed in white fur boots, her sunglasses catching the pale mountain light. "Helena," she called, voice high and bright like a bell in the cold air. "You didn't shovel the path." "It's a mountain," I said, watching her laugh. "It snows here." Behind her came her parents, Sharon and Doug, both carrying coolers and luggage, followed by her sister Brooke and her husband, each dragging children who were already complaining about the cold. Liam was last, holding little Emily's hand. My granddaughter waved, smiling. For her I smiled back. Within 15 minutes my house, my haven, was filled. Coats draped over the banister, boots melting snow into puddles on my polished floors, the smell of expensive perfume mixing with pine wood and smoke. Someone turned on music. Someone else opened my fridge without asking. I stood there in the doorway, invisible in my own home, listening to Jessica's voice carry through the air like static. "Mom, will take the master bedroom, the kids need space." "You don't mind, right? You can have the guest room downstairs. It's cozy." It wasn't a question. I opened my mouth to speak, but Liam gave me that familiar look, the one that said please not now. So I said nothing. I simply nodded and watched them climb the stairs, laughing, dragging suitcases past framed photos of a life they had never lived. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, my kitchen was a battlefield of half-cooked casseroles and chatter. Sharon had taken over the stove, Brooke was reorganizing my spice rack for efficiency, and Jessica had opened a bottle of my wine, the one I'd been saving since my husband's funeral. I stood by the window, mug of tea trembling in my hand, watching the snow deepen outside. They called it a family visit. To me it felt like an invasion. And as I listened to their laughter echo against the walls, I realized something colder than the mountain air. They didn't see me as a hostess. They saw me as a ghost. But ghosts remember. And I had no intention of being invisible in my own house. I used to think that people reveal themselves in how they enter a space. Some come with reverence, others with noise. Jessica's family brought both. Laughter that didn't belong here and an energy that scratched at the stillness like gravel under silk. By the second day I began to understand the scope of what I had allowed in. Sharon, Jessica's mother, had decided the kitchen was her domain. "You have such lovely copper pans, Helena," she said that morning, her bracelets clinking as she rummaged through drawers. "Though I do think you need a better system. I can never find anything in these quaint little houses." She said quaint the way people say poor. By evening my neat rows of labeled jars, thyme, basil, cinnamon, had been replaced with her store-bought seasoning packets, each one dumped haphazardly into a decorative basket that looked like something from a motel breakfast counter. The copper pans I had polished by hand were now stacked crookedly in the sink, soaking in tepid water. Every clang, every spill, Every careless movement felt like a violation of the quiet rituals that had kept me sane. Jessica's sister Brooke took the sunroom. "I just love the light here," she said, dropping her art supplies onto my writing desk. "It's perfect for my yoga practice. Do you mind if I push this chair back?" Before I could respond, she had already dragged my armchair, my reading chair, against the wall. Within an hour, my serene little corner, the one where I watched snow fall through misted glass, was littered with paintbrushes, yoga mats, and a Bluetooth speaker humming soft electronic music. Upstairs, Jessica's father, Doug, had turned my study into his office. He brought in a laptop, a pile of financial magazines, and a portable espresso machine. "Can't start the day without my double shot," he'd said cheerfully, ignoring the framed photograph of my late husband that he'd pushed aside to make room for his gadgets. At lunch, I found him reclining in my leather chair, shoes on my desk, taking a video call with a client. "Beautiful backdrop, isn't it?" he said into his headset, gesturing toward my bookshelf and the window view of the ridge. "We're at my daughter's place in the mountains." His daughter's place. Something inside me went still. Meanwhile, the grandchildren roamed freely, tiny tyrants in snow boots. They trampled through the halls with their cocoa-sticky hands, leaving trails of crumbs and laughter that echoed too loud, too constant. One of them used my embroidery cushion as a snow fort barricade. Another spilled juice on my piano keys. Jessica, ever the orchestrator, floated from room to room like she owned the air itself. "Mom, you don't mind if we rearrange the furniture a bit? The flow feels too closed. We'll put the couch here and move the rug. Oh, and the firewood basket, that's a hazard for the kids." Before I could speak, she had summoned Liam to help her shift everything around. My son, with that same apologetic half-smile, obeyed without a word. It was surreal watching him move the very rug he'd watched me roll out the day I bought the house. I remembered how he'd helped me measure the living room, how he'd said, "You did it, Mom. You finally got your view." Now he couldn't even meet my eyes. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I wandered through the house barefoot, the floorboards cool beneath my feet. The rearranged furniture threw long, unfamiliar shadows on the walls. My kitchen smelled of someone else's perfume and burned onions. My study door was half open, a stranger's laptop glowing inside. No longer felt like a home. Felt like an occupation. I poured myself a small glass of the wine Jessica had opened without asking. It tasted bitter, not from age but from intrusion. I sat in the dark, looking out the window at the lake below. The reflection of the moon trembled in the rippling water, fragile and unsteady. Somewhere upstairs, a child laughed in their sleep. Jessica coughed lightly, her voice carrying even through closed doors. Liam's footsteps paced once, then stopped. Silence again. But it wasn't peace anymore. It was the silence of trespass. I had spent my life building spaces for others. A home for my children, a business for my husband, a world that could stand without me if I were gone. And now that I had finally built something for myself, they had turned it into a weekend getaway. That night, I dreamed I was standing outside in the snow, watching through the window as they sat by my fireplace, my chair, my warmth, laughing, unaware I was there. I woke up with my hands clenched into fists, the faint imprint of my wedding ring pressing into my skin. The next morning, I decided to test the limits of their entitlement. When Brooke asked for clean towels, I told her, "You'll find them in the linen closet, if you can reach them." I had moved them to the top shelf. When Sharon complained about the draft, I quietly adjusted the thermostat to 58 degrees Fahrenheit and said the old system just needed time to regulate. When Doug's espresso machine short-circuited the power outlet in my study, I simply nodded and said, "Mountain wiring. Can't handle too much noise." Jessica, of course, noticed the shift. "Mom, everything okay? You seem tense." I smiled. "Just adjusting. You know how it is when guests overstay." Her eyes narrowed slightly as if she could feel the tension beneath my politeness. But she brushed it off, too self-assured to imagine I'd ever push back. That evening, as the first real storm rolled in over the ridge, thunder rumbling like distant footsteps, I sat again in the dark, this time with purpose. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I had built this house with care, every beam, every nail, every quiet corner chosen for peace. And now, piece by piece, I was going to reclaim it, not by shouting but by reminding them exactly whose name was carved into the deed. And when the mountain decides to remind people who it belongs to, it doesn't ask twice. The mountain has its own kind of silence, Not empty but watchful. It doesn't scream when it's disrespected. It waits. And when it answers, it does so with the inevitability of weather. By the end of that week I had become the mountain. The air in the house was thick with false cheer. Jessica's laughter rang too high, Doug's jokes fell flat, Sharon muttered about rustic inconveniences, and Liam tried to balance it all, pretending not to see that I was no longer a participant in the charade. It started the morning Sharon criticized my coffee. "You really should invest in a decent machine," she said, stirring the cup as if it offended her. "This old percolator makes everything taste burnt." I looked at her, really looked at her. Manicured fingers, pearls glinting under cabin light, her perfume heavy enough to choke out the scent of pine. "I've used that same percolator for 40 years, I said quietly. "It brewed every pot that kept this family fed. Every cup that kept me awake sewing at 2 a.m. when my husband was dying. Every morning that followed." Her spoon froze in the cup. She looked at me as if realizing too late that she had spoken to something larger than her own comfort. I didn't smile. I simply stood, took the cup from her hand, poured it down the sink and handed her a clean one. "If the taste offends you," I said, "boil your own water." That silenced her for the rest of the morning. By afternoon the storm rolled in from the north. The windows rattled as snow thickened into white sheets, and the temperature dropped enough that the wind whistled through the seams of the porch. Doug, still pretending to be the household patriarch, decided it was the perfect time to fix the fireplace. "Helena, this flue is too old," he said, crouched by the hearth. "You should really let me handle these things. You're lucky to have a man around." The words hit the air like a match in dry tinder. "Lucky," I repeated. I stepped closer, the sound of the fire crackling between us. "I built this house without one. I survived 30 years of work without one. I buried one and I rebuilt everything after. I'm not lucky, Doug. I'm capable." He looked up, startled, perhaps not used to women of my generation saying things so plainly. "Now," I added, my voice low and steady, "put down my tools and step away from my fireplace." For the first time he did. Evening came wrapped in howling wind. The storm grew wild, clinging to the walls like a living thing. The lights flickered once, twice, then held steady. Jessica emerged from the master bedroom, my bedroom, wearing one of my cashmere wraps. "Mom," she began in that syrupy tone that always meant trouble, "the Wi-Fi's not working. Could you check the router? The kids are getting restless." I turned from the window slowly, taking in the sight of her. Barefoot on my rug, her hair glossy, my wrap hanging loosely off her shoulders like borrowed dignity. "The Wi-Fi's down because the power lines froze," I said. "And that wrap you're wearing, it belonged to my mother. She hand-stitched it when she was your age." "Oh," she said lightly, smoothing the fabric. "It's so soft. I didn't realize it was sentimental." I walked toward her, each step deliberate, the kind of quiet that fills before an avalanche. "You didn't realize because you never ask. You assume. You take. You walk into people's lives the way you walk into their rooms, as if their space was just waiting for your shadow to fill it." Jessica blinked, a smile frozen halfway. "Mom, I didn't mean. Don't call me that." It was the first time I'd ever said those words aloud. They left my mouth calm, almost gentle, but I saw their weight hit her like stone. Liam had entered the hallway by then, drawn by the tone, his face pale in the firelight. "Mom," he said softly, "please. Let's not do this now." I turned to him, "My son, the boy who once held my hand in every storm." "Liam," I said, "you brought them here without asking. You let them take my room, my things, my peace. You stood by and watched me shrink inside my own home because it was easier than standing up to your wife. Tell me, when did your silence start to sound like loyalty?" His lips parted, but no words came. Only the creak of the floorboards and the whistle of the wind outside. The children, sensing the tension, had fallen quiet. In that moment the entire house, even the mountain, seemed to hold its breath. "I worked 40 years to build a life that wouldn't crumble under someone else's entitlement," I said. "And yet here you all are, rebuilding that old lesson right under my roof." Jessica tried to speak again, but her voice trembled. "We just wanted family time." "No," I interrupted, "you wanted ownership of something that wasn't yours. You came here to take what I earned, to rename it as hospitality, to turn my solitude into your convenience." I walked toward the front door, my steps steady, and reached for the circuit breaker panel. Outside, the wind shrieked, flinging snow against the glass. I flipped the main switch. The house went dark. For a moment there was only silence. Real, total silence. No lights, no screens, no hum of machines. Just the sound of the mountain breathing around us. "Listen," I said softly. "That's what I came here for. The quiet. The kind you can't buy, can't fill, can't fake." Jessica whispered something to Liam, but I couldn't hear her over the storm. The children whimpered. Sharon clutched her pearls. Doug mumbled about safety, about roads closing. I looked at each of them, my face lit only by the dim orange of the dying fire. "The storm will pass by morning," I said. "The roads will open. And when they do, you'll leave. All of you. You'll go back to wherever noise belongs." "Helena," Liam started, his voice breaking, "we didn't mean." "I know," I said. "That's the problem. You never mean to. You just do." No one spoke again. The house creaked inside as if exhaling the intruders it had been forced to hold. By morning the storm had quieted. The world outside was pure and untouched, the lake shimmering under new snow. I came downstairs to find them packing. Quietly, awkwardly, the way people do after a wake. No one met my eyes. Jessica folded the cashmere wrap and placed it gently on the armchair. Sharon wiped the counters. Doug carried out the trash. Liam lingered by the door, his daughter clutching his hand. He turned to me finally. "Mom, I'm sorry." I studied him for a long moment. There was sincerity there, but also confusion. The kind that comes from realizing too late that comfort can be cruelty. "Then learn from it," I said. "Because next time an apology won't open the door." They left without another word. 3 SUVs gliding down the snowy road until the sound of their engines faded into nothing. I closed the door, locked it, and turned to face my house. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. The chairs were crooked, the rugs misaligned, the air faintly smelling of their perfume, but it was mine again. Every imperfection, every echo, every scar. I walked to the window and watched the sunlight stretch across the snow, blinding, pure. In its reflection I caught a glimpse of myself. Older, yes, but sharper. They had mistaken my calm for weakness. The morning after they left, the house breathed differently. The air was lighter, uncluttered. The silence no longer pressed against the walls. It expanded, filling every room like sunlight on snow. I walked barefoot through the cabin, the wooden floor warm under my feet where the early rays fell. The living room still carried faint traces of them. A forgotten mug, a crumpled blanket, a faint perfume in the air. But they were ghosts now, fading with every passing hour. I made coffee in my old percolator, the same one Sharon had insulted, and listened to it gurgle and hiss like a trusted friend reclaiming its voice. The aroma drifted through the room, steady, unbothered. When I took the first sip, it tasted like victory, bitter, familiar, earned. Outside, the mountain gleamed under a thin crust of frost. The trees, heavy with snow, bowed slightly under their own weight but stood tall all the same. I watched the morning mist lift from the frozen lake, slow and graceful, as if nature itself were exhaling after holding its breath. I thought of Liam. Of his awkward apology, his eyes searching for the version of me he remembered. The mother who never said no, who patched his mistakes with forgiveness. I wondered if he understood that love too can grow boundaries. That sometimes protecting peace means choosing solitude over sentiment. When the mail truck came at noon, I stepped outside to meet it, wrapped in my mother's cashmere shawl. The driver handed me a small parcel. Inside was a handwritten note from Liam. "You were right, Mom. About everything. We needed to see it. Thank you for reminding us where we came from." Beneath the note was a framed photograph. One of the cabin taken years ago before it became a battleground. My husband had been alive then. I could see the two of us on the porch, laughing, his arm draped over my shoulder. The caption read, "Home, built once, protected always." I set it on the mantel. For a moment I felt him there, in the wood smoke, the stillness, the quiet pride that filled the room. By evening, the storm had melted into soft gray fog. I lit a fire, curled into my armchair, and watched the flames flicker against the stone hearth. The house no longer echoed with other people's voices, only mine. And that, finally, was enough. I realized something then. Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the moment you stop explaining why you deserve it. I looked out the window at the endless sweep of the mountain, ancient, unmoved, whole. Somewhere below, the winding road carried their tire tracks away, disappearing beneath fresh snow. The mountain would remember. And so would I. When the wind rose again that night, it no longer sounded like intrusion. It sounded like applause. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel anger, hope, or justice, leave me a comment telling me which part impacted you the most. Hit the like button if you think Jessica did the right thing by defending her dignity. And subscribe to the channel to keep listening to stories of brave women who refuse to be victims. Because true wealth isn't in what you own, but in what you refuse to let anyone take from you. Tell me, where are you watching from? Write your city or country in the comments. I love knowing that these stories are reaching hearts all over the world. See you in the next story. And remember, it's never too late to get your voice.